When editing in any software, you want to have smooth, real-time playback. Nobody enjoys editing with lag, where you hit play and there is a short, sometimes long delay before the video starts or stops. Lag can also present while scrubbing, where instead of seeing the frame smoothly follow the movement of the playhead, they stutter and occasionally freeze. There are several things we can do to get the best performance and playback out of Adobe Premiere. The first thing is to make sure your footage and project files are on a fast, separate hard drive than the one hosting your operating system and applications. This not only makes more sense for storage of lots of large video files, but also has the benefit of letting the drive running your software run a little easier, giving us a little bit of a performance boost in Premiere. The main drive of your computer is always under a certain amount of workload when it's on. This workload consists of running the operating system and whatever software you are currently running. If your footage files are also on this drive, you are adding to that workload when Premiere is trying to play them back in real time. By moving the footage to another fast drive, you also move that workload, putting less strain on the main drive, making things run smoother. I organize all of my project files using a project folder system, which I talk about more in the file organization video here. But basically, it involves keeping a copy of all the files being used for a project in a single organized folder. As for where that folder should live, the best answer for now is on some kind of fast SSD or solid-state storage device. That could be a single small external USB-C drive or an array of SSDs formatted as a RAID to create a large volume. Personally, I currently still use a 4-slot RAID box with fast hard disk drives or HDDs. They are all 7200 RPM and slotted into a 4-drive enclosure and are formatted in a RAID 5 configuration. When I upgrade, which will most likely be later this year, I will be moving to an SSD RAID setup, most likely using a 4 or 8-drive enclosure and SSDs from Otherworld Computing. The second thing we can do to get fast, smoother playback in the interface is to go to the Program panel and drop the Playback Resolution. In this drop-down menu, you'll find some fractions that represent what resolution this panel is set to play back at. If it's set to full, Premiere will attempt to play back every pixel in every frame of whatever is in the timeline. Of course, the only way to truly see this is to also set the zoom level drop-down to 100%. This will most likely make the image too large to see. It will also add sliders to the side and bottom. You can use these to navigate around the different areas of the frame. I do this occasionally to critically check things like focus. These settings are the most demanding on the computer, and for the most part, unnecessary. Generally, I'll set the zoom level to fit, which is typically a zoomed out or smaller view of the frame that fits the current size of the panel. Since the image is shrunk down, I can't possibly see all of the pixels anyway, so it makes no sense to set the playback resolution to full. I will typically set this as low as it'll let me. For HD sequences, that's going to be 1/4 resolution. For 4K and higher resolutions, some of the smaller fractions become available. Using a lower resolution will also give us a small performance boost, as we are only playing back, for example, 1/4 of the pixels. So Premiere only needs to do 1/4 of the work. The frame may look a little blurry on playback, but I don't need to see it sharp and at full resolution while I'm making selects or putting together my edit. I'd much rather have a snappy timeline and smooth playback with no lag. I can always change these settings if I want to watch or check something out at full resolution. No matter what setting this menu is set to, your video will always export at full resolution unless you go through some extra steps to specifically tell it not to. The third big thing we can do to get better performance is to make proxy files of our footage. A proxy is a copy of our footage file, but in a smaller resolution size and in a video codec that is easier for Premiere to play back in real time. With proxy mode turned on, Premiere will play back the frames from the proxy clip instead of the high-resolution footage to boost performance. Setting up proxy mode is super easy. When I start a new project, one of the first things I'll do is import my footage and organize my project panel. Once I've imported all the footage I currently have, I'll look at the resolution size of that footage. I can select either individual or groups of clips, or I can select an entire folder or bin. I will right-click the selection and go down the menu to where it says Proxy. In the pop-up menu, I will choose Create Proxy. The Create Proxies panel will pop up for you to dial in the settings and location you would like to use. For format, I always choose QuickTime because it has options for codecs that are more performance-based rather than, say, H.264, which prioritizes being efficient with storage space and is really more of a delivery or final codec instead of an editing codec. So QuickTime for the format, and under Preset, I select ProRes Low Resolution Proxy. This sets the video codec to ProRes, which was developed by Apple to be a performance-based editing codec, meaning the files are larger than H.264 because they are less compressed, but they play back easier in an editing software like Final Cut or Premiere. There are several different versions of the ProRes codec. Some are completely lossless or uncompressed and are great for a final master file once you are done with your edit. This preset will use the ProRes Proxy version, which removes some of the data or quality in order to make a lighter weight file that an editing app can easily navigate. The low resolution part means that it will also make this copy smaller in frame size than the original, making it an easier file to play back. So, we are making a copied set of footage. So the next thing this panel wants to know is where do you want to save that copy? There are two options you can check. I used to always choose the first, next to original and proxy folder, which would create a folder in the same place as the original files and call it Proxies, and the copies would all go in there. If you have footage spread out in different folders, it would make a proxy folder in each location. This works fine, but I came to find it had several drawbacks in certain situations. For example, if I wanted to quickly select and copy or delete all the proxies, I would have to go find all the different proxy folders in each location. What I typically do now is use the second option, which allows you to choose your own location. In my project folder, I organize my footage like this: a general folder called Media in the root directory, and then a folder specifically for footage in there. Footage is usually organized into subfolders by location, date, camera, or card number, or whatever makes the most sense for your production. In the main footage folder, I make a proxy folder and store all of the proxies for this project there. That way, if I want to, for example, copy all the proxies to a smaller drive that I can take with me to edit while I'm traveling, I can easily select all the proxies in one place rather than dig through potentially dozens of different folders. Once you've selected your location, click the OK button. A progress bar will appear showing the jobs being exported out to another application called Media Encoder, which will automatically launch. Let Media Encoder fully open, and the queue will automatically populate with the footage you chose in Premiere. It will also start the transcode process automatically. No need to do anything inside of Media Encoder manually. Depending on the horsepower of your computer and the amount and size of the files you are encoding, this process can take several minutes to several hours. For me, using a Mac Studio with an M1 Ultra chip, about an hour of raw 4K footage takes about 10 minutes, give or take. After all the proxies are done transcoding, we just need to make sure proxy mode is active in Premiere to take advantage of the lightweight proxy files. Click this button in the program panel and make sure it's blue or active. If you don't see the blue button, open the Add button menu and drag it to the control area. In the project panel, under the metadata display, we can see that there is now proxies attached to each clip. Also, if the clips are in a sequence in the timeline panel, we can see this small box, which will be blue if proxy mode is on, indicating that when it's playing, it is pulling frames from the proxy file rather than the high-resolution media. You can turn proxy mode on or off with this button if you want to spot check the quality or focus on something. Using proxy and dropping the playback resolution will make for a pretty fuzzy looking picture in the program panel, but that's not what it'll look like once exported. By default, Premiere will export your video from the high-resolution footage and at full quality unless you specifically tell it not to. Doing these three things, keeping your project files on a separate fast drive, turning down the playback resolution, and creating and using proxies should give you a noticeable improvement in performance and make your life a bit easier as you edit your videos. There are a couple of other issues that can affect playback that you may encounter. The first has to do with the media cache. These are files that get created every time you import footage into Premiere. They help Premiere play back the files easier. The location of these files has a default location on your local hard drive and is set in the Preference panel under Media Cache. I have a 2 TB SSD called Cache that is only used for the media cache and set as a location in this setting here. I don't know if I have noticed a big performance boost doing this, but it has stopped my local hard drive from filling up with the media cache files, which can pile up on large projects using lots of footage. The last thing I'll talk about in this video is if you've done all the previous steps and you are still having playback issues. The truth is, some file formats straight out of the camera are not great editing formats or codecs. In theory, creating proxies should fix this issue, and it does most of the time. However, there are some formats that still behave poorly even if they have a proxy version made. One place I encounter this issue all the time is footage from DJI drones. The codec is something that Premiere just doesn't like and causes all sorts of issues like stuttering, lagging, and freezing on playback, even when proxy mode is on. You'll learn which formats give you issues like this consistently, and I have a workaround for those types of files. I typically look through the files before I import things into Premiere, and if I see some folders of footage that I know will likely be problematic, I will use Media Encoder to transcode that stuff into the ProRes HQ codec, which maintains its original quality but puts it into a codec that is better for editing. So, I moved the original files into a new folder called Original. And then I add them to the Media Encoder queue with my QuickTime ProRes HQ settings. And set them to go into another new folder called ProRes, next to the original folder. I do this for each folder of problematic footage. Once that is done, I move on to the import stage and import the ProRes versions instead of the originals. Once imported, if they are 4K files, I will then make proxies of those files. And that usually sorts out any other playback issues.